The sun blared from behind as I gazed at passing midsummer woods and stretches of farmland littered with flocks of sheep. I'd driven 4 hours on the highway and 1 hour off of it when I recognized the familiar Hobbs residence. It was a sizable, though not huge, Victorian house, and its estate contained a pool, grazing animals, and several barns. A few days earlier, I'd accepted Abigail's invitation to hang out with her for a long weekend. We'd been friends since we met during the first week of college, only for campus to shut down midway through our junior year, and we were both eager to spend time together in person before our virtual final semesters began. Abigail had also invited Morgan, a girl 2 years behind us from a neighboring college who I'd met at a few parties. After tonight, Abigail's parents, who were housing her for the summer, would be out of town, and the three of us would have the place to ourselves. This would be as close to a summer vacation as we expected to get, but it suited our relatively mild-mannered temperaments. But first, we had to endure the fundraiser Abigail's parents were holding for a local politician before they departed to visit 2 of Abigail's grandparents. As I pulled into the crowded driveway, I saw fancily dressed people chatting inside and outside the house. "Peter!" exclaimed Abigail as I removed my travel bag from my car's trunk. I greeted her with a quick hug, and I thanked her for inviting me over again. I asked her how the fundraiser was going. Abigail rolled her hazel eyes. She didn't need to provide further explanation. Let's just say that the guest of honor had made national news for his statements, implying that the subjects essential to a proper education did not include evolution. Mr. and Mrs. Hobbs, Tom and Martha, as they prefer me to call them, greeted me inside. I was as polite with them as I was when they introduced me to the congressional candidate, who related to me how he used to be a preacher, and it had been God's will for him to win a competitive primary. Afterwards, Martha pulled me aside. "I hope you have a very nice weekend with my daughter," she said. "I think you're such a gentleman." "I'm sure we'll have a good time, Mrs. Hobbs." Martha," I said. "I'm so glad you're spending time with her," said Mrs. Hobbs. "I keep telling her that she needs to find a good Christian man like you to settle down with." Abigail had warned me that her mother would do this. I should have had some calculated response planned, but I only stammered, "Well, she's a good friend, and it's nice of you all to let us come over." Thankfully, someone important distracted Martha. I made a quick getaway to a couch where I took a seat between Abigail and Morgan. I told Morgan that I was happy to see her again. She had a sprightly personality and was nearly as short as Abigail, but frailer and lacking the roughness Abigail had acquired growing up helping run her parents' farm. The three of us talked for a bit as the party slowly died down. "My mother still wants you to marry me, doesn't she?" asked Abigail. "Yeah, but I didn't make any promises," I replied. We all shared a laugh. "My mom keeps saying similar things to me," said Morgan. "You should date this guy. You should date that guy. Usually someone they saw at church who's like 7 years older than me." The guests steadily exited. Eventually, aside from me and my friends, only Mr. and Mrs. Hobbs remained. I helped them load their car and watched them drive away in the early evening light. When I returned to the house, Abigail lay on the couch with Morgan wrapped in her arms. They both looked appropriately relaxed and at ease now that we were alone. "It's awfully pretty outside," I announced. "I'm going to take a walk and come back in an hour or so." "You sure?" asked Abigail. "Yeah, don't worry," I said. It was Abigail and Morgan's first chance in months to spend time with each other, out of the sight of either of their disapproving sets of parents. I was inevitably going to end up third-wheeling them over the weekend, but I wanted to at least give them some time alone at the start. And, in truth, I did like the idea of walking through some of the open countryside before the light started to fade. As I trudged next to one of the long wooden fences that contained the Hobbs farm animals, I sensed a strange staleness in the air. I heard a repeating thump sound and identified its source. Dark blood ran down the head of a calf. It whimpered in pain as it charged into a barn wall, ran back, and then charged into the wall again. The full-grown cows around the calf ignored what was happening. Instead, they eyed me with what I felt to be a sense of hostility. A deep grumbling sound emitted from several of them, who who promptly sprinted towards me. I froze, but thankfully the cows slowed to a stop just before they reached the fence. They exhaled hot air onto my face. From their looks and sounds, I could tell that they were not happy with me. I moved along. The descending sun now rendered the valley beyond in blood red. I noticed something odd wherever the grass hit the perimeter of the surrounding woods. Dozens of dark figures standing stiffly with outstretched arms. I approached the nearest one, in the process stepping over a rodent's carcass around which insects swarmed. I identified the figure as a scarecrow made of straw. I hadn't noticed these scarecrows on any of my previous visits here. Had Mr. and Mrs. Hobbs added them recently? I began my walk back alongside long corn stalks that lined the neighboring property. The plants, which had appeared golden and healthy from the road, now looked sickly. One drooped slightly, and I thought I saw a red, mucky substance dripping from the darkened husk, like it was bleeding. Too curious for my own good, I reached out to touch it and get a better look. "Not so fast there, stranger," pronounced a deep country voice. Startled, I jumped back to see a deeply tanned man in blue overalls wielding a shotgun. "Get the hell away from my property." He pumped the weapon. Okay, I said, trying to defuse the situation. "I don't think I'm even on your property." "I saw what you were doing, young man, or whatever you are," said the man. "I didn't give you permission to reach in and touch my crops." "I wasn't," the man cut me off. "You're not from around here, are you?" "No, sir," I responded. I hadn't taken my eye off his gun. I'd heard stories of people being shot as trespassers by property owners, citing castle doctrines or stand-your-ground laws, and feared becoming a statistic. "Do you believe in God?" he asked. Yeah, I lied. The antagonism in his voice slightly faded. "Look, son," he said, "I'm going to give you a few benefits of the doubt, so to speak. You hadn't gotten onto my property yet, but you looked like you were ready to without my invitation. That, along with you not looking like someone who belongs in these parts, leads me to think that maybe you're deserving of a bit of advice." He continued, "There are spirits in these woods, dark spirits. Usually they leave us alone. But I've lived here long enough to get a sense of when they're displeased. Let me tell you something. Right now, they're displeased. You'd better watch yourself. Whatever you do, don't let them in. At first, they'll ask for permission. Don't give it to them. That'll delay them. But then, they'll try go get in by force. Resist like your life depends on it. When they're this angry, they won't stop until their appetite is sated." He took a step closer to me and looked me in the eye. "But don't come running to me for help. I still don't know for a fact that you're not one of them, and I've got myself to look out for. If you step 1 foot on my property, I'll blow your goddamn head off." And with that, he marched back into the cornfield. I tried to process what had just happened as I hurried to the house. As I entered the back patio, I took one last look at the estate. Somehow the scarecrows that stood idly in the distance appeared more numerous than before. They were still arranged around the property's perimeter, but I could have sworn that they had moved several yards closer. The living room was empty, but I discerned that my friends were upstairs, and still didn't want to interrupt them. I took a seat on the couch and checked my phone. No service. I turned on the television and tried to convince myself that I'd merely run into a crazed man and that my mind was playing tricks on me regarding the scarecrows. I tried to focus on the cheesy made-for-television movie that played before me, but images of the calf slamming itself so pointlessly and painfully into the wall kept flashing through my mind. Plus, I still felt unnerved from having a loaded gun pointed at me. I was relieved when Abigail and Morgan exited Abigail's bedroom and walked down the stairs to join me. "Nice walk?" Morgan asked. "It was all right," I said. "You doing okay?" asked Abigail. "Yeah, though your neighbor didn't take kindly to me approaching his property." I figured she didn't need to hear my worries about the scarecrows, which I increasingly felt convinced were unfounded, and that any description of the self-harming calf could wait until the morning. "Oh no," said Abigail. "I should have warned you about Mr. Carlson. He didn't take out his shotgun, did he?" I nodded and alliterated the sound of him pumping it. "Damn, dude, I'm so sorry about that," said Abigail. Like I said, I should have warned you. He got in some trouble for shooting in the air when some kids snuck onto his property a little while back. The sheriff let him off with a warning. "Take this," said Morgan, tossing me a cold beer from the fridge. I took several gulps. As I'd hoped, the alcohol calmed me. "The food we ordered should be here before too long," said Abigail. "I wish I could check on the progress, but our phones have stopped working since we made the order." I offered to help pay, but Abigail insisted it was on her, saying with a wink that she owed me one. I started to enjoy myself. The fears that had run through me over the last few minutes dissipated as we powered up an N64 and played several rounds of Mario Kart. Morgan and I repeatedly fought for first place while Abigail, likely influenced by the alcohol we passed around, and that I'd also had more than my fair share of, finished a distant third. After several rounds of this, the front doorbell rang. Abigail got up to accept our delivery. As she did so, I recalled Mr. Carlson's warnings. "Whatever you do, don't let them in." "Wait," I said to Abigail, who shot me a confused look. "Hello?" I called to the other side of the door. "Hey, it's George here with your delivery. You all weren't answering your phones, but I've got everything you requested." I grabbed Abigail's arm when she reached for the door. "What's wrong?" she asked, shaking me off. "Sorry," I said. Mr. Carlson warned me about letting people in." "He always says stuff like that," said Abigail. "Just ignore it." "But he mentioned spirits, and I saw dozens of scarecrows." "How many drinks have you had, Peter?" called Morgan, giggling. Abigail, however, looked a little concerned. "What did you say about scarecrows?" she asked. "There were more of them than before, I think," I said. "And it was like they were moving. There were other things too." "You're being ridiculous," said Morgan. Before I could stop her, she brushed by me and opened the door. On the porch stood a scrawny young man of about my age holding several boxes of pizza. I felt foolish as he innocently dropped off the food. "Can I trouble y'all for a glass of water?" he asked. "Of course," said Abigail. The door drifted shut as she went to the kitchen. I eyed George uneasily, trying to identify anything off about him. But he appeared to be nothing other than an innocuous late teen in a red shirt with a matching hat. I shook my head and chided myself for getting caught up in the nonsense the crazy neighbor had told me. "You seem mighty worried," said George. "Everything all right?" I shrugged. "Just worked up over nothing." The doorbell rang again. "Y'all expecting more company?" asked George. He sipped the water Abigail had brought for him. "Nope," I said. "I'll check who it is." "It's probably a Bigfoot," said Morgan, laughing playfully. I ignored her. "Hello?" I called through the door. "Hey, it's George here with your delivery," said a familiar voice on the other end. "You all weren't answering your phones, but I've got everything you requested." The room turned dead silent as I felt a jolt run through my heart. "What?" stammered George. "Are you guys playing some kind of prank?" As I positioned my face to look through the peephole, suddenly everything went black. "Damn!" cried Abigail. "Power's out." I could see nothing outside, even after my eyes adjusted. I hopped back as the knocking resumed, this time with greater power that shook the door. "Your pizza's getting cold. Can you let me in?" called the voice. I locked the door. Moments later, the knob turned as the person outside tried to open it. "I don't like this," said Abigail. Morgan looked befuddled. "I don't know what's going on with y'all, if you're pranking me with a recording of my own voice or what," said George. "Thank you for the water, but I'm leaving." He opened the door and stepped outside, only to walk directly into a tall, dark figure of straw. My jaw dropped in horror as the scarecrow shoved its impossibly strong arm into George's chest. The arm emerged from George's back as the scarecrow lifted him into the air. George let out a faint, muffled cry as blood spewed out of him onto the porch. The scarecrow discarded George's body and turned to me. Bright red eyes distinguished its otherwise blank face. Frantically, I slammed the door shut and locked it. "What's going on?" asked Morgan. "Everything okay?" I realized that she and Abigail weren't in sight of the door and hadn't seen what I just witnessed. "The doors," I blurted out. "We need to lock all of them, every last one." "What? What's wrong?" asked Abigail. I pleaded until she agreed to secure them. After that, I explained to her and Morgan what Mr. Carlson had told me, as well as my own observations of the injured calf and the encroaching scarecrows. "The thing is," said Abigail, "we don't have any scarecrows. We stopped needing them when we stopped growing crops. And these spirits Mr. Carlson talked about, my parents always told me the same thing, that if I misbehaved and upset them, there were entities in the woods who would creep out and punish anyone they find. Of course, I never believed them, not till now at least." Morgan remained skeptical. "That all sounds like fairy tales, and I just don't believe you, Peter, when you say you saw a scarecrow rip apart George. That's insane. You've had a lot to drink, and it was too dark to see anything clearly. And if something did attack him, a person, or even some wild animal, he could be injured and needing our help." We heard a mechanical sound of movement, followed by a slam of metal against the ground. "That's the garage door," said Abigail, looking petrified. "I didn't lock it." The garage connected to the basement, and a staircase from the basement led to the kitchen. "Does the door it leads to up here have a lock?" I asked. Abigail shook her head. I got an idea. Abigail and I shoved a heavy bookcase from the living room toward the stairs. "Help!" croaked George's voice. "I've been hurt! There's something out there!" From what we could hear, he was slowly crawling up the stairs. Abigail and I positioned the bookcase to block the door to the basement. Moments later, a force on the other side of the door started to try to break through, but was unable to dislodge the bookcase. "Please help me," said the voice. "I'm badly hurt. I need water. Let me in." Morgan looked on uncertain. "He needs help," she said. "You really think he lifted the garage door while injured this badly?" asked Abigail. "It's not him. No way." The pressure against the door, and thus against the bookcase, grew. Books jostled and fell. Abigail and I threw ourselves against it. Morgan joined us. We held our ground, and eventually, whatever was on the other side stopped trying to enter. We barely had a moment to compose ourselves before we heard a gentle tap from the back patio, followed by Mrs. Hobbs's voice. "Open up, children. We decided to come back tonight, but we can't seem to find our keys. We tried calling, but we couldn't get through. Do you know why the power seems to be out?" "It's not them," whispered Morgan. "No way." "Abigail," called Martha, "please let us in, will you, sweetie?" "Can they look like us too?" asked Abigail. "How would I know?" I responded. "So far, they've just sounded like us." Abigail approached a glass window. "Mother," said Abigail. "Yes, dear," replied whatever was outside. "Can you please come up to the window and let me see your face?" asked Abigail. "Honey, what's this about? Is something the matter?" the voice responded. "Please just show your face so that I know that it's you," said Abigail. It grew quiet, aside from the ticking of a grandfather clock. Finally, Martha's face appeared amidst the darkness and pressed against the glass. "Are you happy now, dear?" Only her mouth didn't move with the words. In fact, her mouth didn't move at all. The sound came from somewhere else. The color faded from Abigail's face. What is this?" She started to shake. "I told you what would happen if you misbehaved," said Martha's disconnected voice. "I tried to warn you, but you didn't listen." Martha's face slowly receded. It disappeared from sight, only to reappear moving towards the window. I finally got a good look at what it was connected to, the body of a calf. Abigail shrieked as the calf jumped and its human head slammed into the glass window. The face displayed an expression of discomfort and pain, even as Martha's laughter echoed from the dark void of night. The calf withdrew and crashed into the window again. Several bloody bruises now marked Martha's face on its deformed human head. Abigail covered her eyes as it continued to slam into the glass, which started to crack. The bookcase behind us shook again. "Please, spare some water for a stranger," moaned George's voice as whatever emitted it pushed against the door. Morgan held the bookcase and did her best to stop its entry. I would have joined her, but a loud bang rang from the front door. I went to investigate, and from the bulges appearing in the wood, it was obvious that something was trying to break it down. "We can't stay here," I said. "Well, what the heck do we do?" asked Morgan. Abigail remained transfixed by the horrific sight of her mother's deteriorating head crashing into the glass. Meanwhile, the front door collapsed as a bulky creature I quickly recognized as the bull Abigail's family owned charged through it. A sudden force on the other side of the basement door sent Morgan sprawling onto the ground. Abigail snapped out of her daze to pull her girlfriend aside just as the bookshelf collapsed. A straw arm reached out of the doorframe and began pushing the collapsed furniture out of its way. The calf with Martha's bloodied head burst through the glass and rolled onto the floor. Behind it, a seemingly sentient tree branch extended through the broken window. "Upstairs!" yelled Abigail. She helped Morgan to her feet, and they started to run. I did my best to follow. The bull charged at me. I toppled the grandfather clock and several other pieces of furniture into its path, which at least briefly slowed it. As I hurried up the stairs, the tip of the tree branch wrapped around my foot. I called for help as it dragged me down. Morgan hopped to me and removed my shoe, which the branch proceeded to pull away. We scrambled to the second floor. "Behind you!" cried Abigail. A scarecrow that looked strangely like Tom Hobbs had caught up to us. It swung its sharp arm. Realizing it was trying to impale Morgan, I pulled her towards me. The arm mostly missed its target, but still scraped against Morgan's shoulder. She nearly lost balance, but I helped her make it to Abigail's room. Upon entering, Abigail locked her door and shoved her mattress against it. The three of us pressed against it with all our might as, repeatedly, forces from the other side tried to enter. Blood leaked from Morgan's injured shoulder as we did so. Abigail dragged a dresser over, which we added to our barricade against the door. What felt like hours passed as we did all we could to stave off whatever was trying to enter. Dozens of voices called out to us to let them in, including those of George, Abigail's parents, and Morgan's parents. Others claimed to be deputies there to help. We didn't respond to any of them. At one point, a straw arm pushed through the door and reached around our barrier. Abigail used her lighter to ignite it, and it withdrew with a pained hiss. As our barricade finally started to collapse, several distant shotgun blasts sounded. The house then grew quiet. We waited for a full hour before cautiously venturing back into the rest of the house. It was as wrecked as we expected, but vacant of any scarecrows, disfigured animals, or whatever else had broken in from the woods. The front porch had a bloodstain but no body. It didn't take long for us to identify the second victim, whose evisceration had apparently fulfilled the bloodlust of the entities from the woods. Before leaving, they had left behind two figures that swayed in the distance. One wore a red shirt and a matching red hat. Blue overalls covered the other's frame, and a shotgun lay balanced on its straw arms. Hello there, thank you for watching. How did you like the creepy atmosphere in this story? Do let me know in the comments below. If you want a similar story, check the story on screen. Lastly, if you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay creepy, and see you in the next story.